All right, sorry, new technology, we're all getting it fixed here. So, good morning, good morning. So far, I think everything is going really well. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started on some educational stuff. Okay, only want this. Okay. All right, so what a crazy year it's been, right? I think we've said that numerous times. While sometimes it's easy though to be really negative about all the happenings that's happening, I'm trying to count the blessings as well. For example, I have been stuck in a house with my husband along with our 12 and 14-year-old boys. I could choose to focus on them eating me out of house and home, which they are doing a lot. But instead, I'm trying to focus on the positive of it. We actually gained time with our children that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Family, quality time, and we really did try to take advantage of it during this whole pandemic. Same thing applies with work. Lori and I miss seeing all of you. As Paul said, we really do enjoy being there in person. We like the socialization. We like that one-on-one FaceTime. But things happen and we can't always do that. So it's been kind of a bummer of a year because of that. We are, though, using this opportunity to get comfortable with this virtual world of meetings. We are also using this, and especially the next 2 days, we are trying to brainstorm in ways that we can actually use this, moving forward. Not that we would do virtual conferences, but what if we did smaller sessions, like an hour? I brought everybody together, gave you information you needed for an hour, things like that. So we're in the process of brainstorming. We're always open to ideas. So if you've got them, you can shoot them over to the county's email box, and we'd be happy to take a look. So while technology is great and when it works, it's fantastic. So we're lucky it's working now. When it doesn't, it does become a little frustrating. So we're hopeful that any issues that occur during the next 2 days will be minor and really easily fixed. If you are virtual and you're having a sound issue, we ask that you check your connections and your speakers first, okay? If you're still having a problem, you can put a message through to us so that we can see it. If it starts to become an overall problem, and then we'll stop for a second and see if it's on our end. A quick reminder is that if you are participating virtually, you do have the option of using the chat box to answer or to ask questions. If you don't have the chat box or you would prefer it to be in the email, you can email us at counties.sboa.in.gov. Sorry. So we are monitoring both the county's email box and the chat box, hoping to provide real-time answers to your questions. If you're in person, Vicki kind of touched on this. You can get a hold of her. Her and Jennifer Flater will be trying to get us those questions as they come through. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was registrations. If you are virtual, you do not need to do anything. You're automatically registered when you sign in to the link. If you are in person, you should have something to sign each day. Okay, those will be sent to us and the certifications will be done off of those. If you have any questions, I'm thinking Debbie's got them, Debbie Stevens. So this again is the first time we've put on a conference with this hybrid-like experience. It has taken a lot of time to get this done, a lot of practicing, so we do appreciate Zach and his help moving forward. We hope that you have patience and with us as we go along this, and we hope it provides some educational information for you. With that being said, let's get on to what you really want to hear about, and it's the CARES Act. All right. I'm going to try and do some of these a little faster just for time's sake. So, COVID-19 grants, they're coming out of our ears, right? There are a lot of different ones out there. We're only going to touch on a few of them. We are mainly going to spotlight on the one that's coming from the Indiana Finance Authority, okay? But before we get there, I want to start with some other ones. What I do want you to remember is that these grants are all a little different, and you need to follow the grant agreement. And any questions that you have about like allowable expenditures or compliance requirements, they really need to be directed to your grantor agency and get the guidance from them. Lori and I will be happy to discuss how to account for these grant dollars. Okay, so you can give us a call. We'll go through what we know here. We hope these resources can help you, and then we'll talk about some accounting for these grants. So the grants I want to touch on first, these grants are the CARES Act provider grants. I put this in bold and I put this underlined because I think this kind of gets mixed up a little bit. But these grants are for providers that accept Medicare and Medicaid. Example would be if your county has EMS or a health clinic. These were among the first grants that kind of went out. The CFDA numbers were found in the frequently asked questions on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services website. Again, check your grant agreement and other documentation to determine what the CFDA number is for your grant. This is just a resource. We've been noticing that these provider grants, like I said, have been kind of mistaken for the CARES Act money that's coming from IFA. They are two totally separate grants. Remember, really CARES Act, when we're talking about it, is really kind of the umbrella over most of these grants that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to try and be very specific when I'm talking about a grant, so that try not to confuse them, okay? Okay, so the Provider Relief Fund, this slide, provides some information on that. We kind of touched over it, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We did this at the last conference in May. But remember, these grants, again, are providers that accept Medicare and Medicaid. This grant was hitting the county's bank accounts in early April. Counties would automatically receive payment if they received Medicare fee for service reimbursements in 2019. This was actually just the initial $50 billion phase one of the general distribution from Health and Human Services. The funds were wired directly into the Optum bank account with the description HHS payment. The county was then required to fill out an attestation form confirming the receipt of the payment and agreeing to the terms and conditions within 30 days. Though if you did nothing, it was viewed as acceptance. The State Board of Accounts, we issued a memo in April, on April 20th, giving some information and some newly assigned fund number, which was the 8900. There have been two more phases of this grant, but there are submission processes involved. I'll just cover them real briefly. There's a phase two, which its deadline to apply was September 13th. But really it was a general distribution that had some stricter eligibility requirements, but mainly for state Medicaid and CHIP programs. Phase three is the general distribution that's available to the providers who have already received Provider Relief Fund payments. You are able to apply for additional funding, and it considers the financial losses and changes in operating expenses caused by the coronavirus. This application is still open. There are several other COVID grants that are offered through the targeted distributions for areas that have been majorly impacted for COVID outbreaks, but these grants are mainly for hospitals and nursing homes. Okay. So here's some resources. If your county has received the CARES Act Provider Relief Fund. The first one is the website for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This provides a wealth of information, guys. It includes terms and conditions, frequently asked questions, reporting requirements, auditing requirements. So we encourage you, if you have received this grant, go to this website, take a look, okay? The other one is a link to the memo for the one for the CARES Act fund numbers that the State Board of Accounts released. All the memos, directives, and things that we have released are on our homepage. So if you go to our homepage and you scroll down, they are all located there. We are also sending these out through our new eGov system. So you should be getting them there. We're also sending them through AIC. Your association board is getting them and trying to send them out. So hopefully you're receiving them. If you have not received them, please let us know so that we can figure out what's going on, okay? We want to make sure everybody is informed. Okay, I'm going to kind of move a little faster. This one I'm just going to kind of really briefly touch on because I haven't really seen any counties have it, but this grant was testing for uninsured. It allowed you, it was a reimbursable grant. You had to apply for it. It was really just for testing for patients who didn't have insurance. You had to send in a reimbursement and then a test that the patient didn't have insurance. Once verified, reimbursements were based on Medicare rates and direct deposited into the Optimum bank account. Again, this would be one of those funds or one of these grants that would be receipted into 8901 to 8925. That was the series that we set up. Can't do it left-handed. Okay, this right here is just, again, some resources, frequently asked questions. The top link kind of takes you so that you can see how to apply for the grant and what you need to know and how to get started. Okay, so as with any other federal grant, a separate fund should be established for each separately identified assistance provided. This is the normal process for tracking expenditures and reimbursements with state and federal grants. While the title of the fund needs to clearly identify the assistance provided, remember, again, CARES Act is kind of the umbrella. So you need to put COVID in the grant name, but don't label them all CARES Act. Make sure you understand which one goes with which. So the title could just be maybe a few words to describe it, or maybe you know what the program title of the grant is and you want to use that. Either way, whatever works best for you. Any and all documentation received by the county should be maintained for audit purposes. Also make sure the grant agreements are being followed, because that's what we will be auditing against, okay? One important aspect of these grants, with them being COVID and related to the related to the State Board of Accounts, we will not take audit exception to creating these funds without an ordinance, okay? And all this information was put out in the Accounting and Appropriation of COVID-19 memo. We're going to go through that here shortly. All right, real quickly, I've only heard of a few counties who have actually received the FEMA. That doesn't mean there's not more. I just don't know of them. So again, this one's, pretty, cut and dry. You need to have a separate fund set up for that grant. You need to track those expenditures. You need to maintain all of that documentation and follow the agreement in place. Really, that's okay. All right. So we're moving right along here. There's a lot of information here, so I'm sorry if I'm going kind of fast. So while we will be discussing IFAs here in just a moment in a lot further detail, I do want to focus the next couple slides on these others listed here. There's a lot of different sources where this money is coming through, but these are the ones that we're most familiar with, that we've heard the most about. So again, check your grant agreement or reach out to your grantor agency with questions on what your CFDA numbers are. especially if it's not clearly identified in the agreement. I've got some information. I'm going to give you some CFDAs I've heard of. Again, just a resource. You need to verify what your CFDA number is for your grant. Okay, Secretary of State's been passing through some CARES money as well. From what we've seen, it appears the CFDA number on this is 90.404, called the HAVA CARES Act Grant, and it's really strictly to be used on elections. State Department of Health has issued a few grants as well. The ones we're available or that we're aware of is there's a 21.019, the Coronavirus Relief Fund. There's also a 93.323, and I apologize for murdering this word, epidemiology of laboratory capacity and infectious diseases. And then OCRA's got one out. That's kind of related to the Community Development Block Grant. I'm not seeing a CFDA number for this one, but it is out there. There's also one, Federal Aviation Authority has issued some to the airports. Again, I don't have a CFDA number for that, but these, like I said, are just examples, okay? So let's talk about accounting for these grants. So this slide should look very familiar because really I took it from a couple slides ago and just copied it back in here because the same rules apply. Each grant must be maintained in a separate fund that clearly identifies the assistance with COVID being a part of the title. The Community Development Block Grant, if you're getting that with the actual grant, you really need to track those separately. So you know which part is the COVID and which part is the regular. If you are receiving more than one grant with the same CFDA number, but they have different pass-throughs, each of those grants would be in a separate fund tracked by that pass-through. So I can't again express how important it is to check your grant agreement. Some of these grants are very narrowly focused and the money can only be used for specific things or activities. Again, for example, Secretary of State's pass through the federal grant appears to be only for elections. I don't know what part of elections, so make sure, is it just one section? Is it all? I don't know. So make sure you really read those grant agreements. If you're unsure of what is allowable, an allowable cost from this grant, you need to reach out to your grantor agency and maintain all documentation provided. Along with the claims and invoices paid, make sure you keep any and all agreements and correspondence. These documents are a great resource not only for you and what the grant can be used for, they also are a great resource for us during the audit process, okay? So having a separate file for each and every federal grant is a good place to start. This has always been our recommendation with any grants that you have. And by keeping all of those files together, it is truly a time saver. When our federal specialists are auditing the federal grants, they're making sure the county is following the grant agreement along with other federal guidelines outlined in the compliance supplement. Wow. All right. Well, there we go. So now let's get talking about what you really want to talk about, which is the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is the one that is distributed by Indiana Finance Authority, or IFA. Okay, so I don't want to get this confused with the provider relief funds that we discussed earlier, okay, because again, it's separate. This grant is the CARES Act dollars that are being distributed by IFA through a reimbursement process. So I've set this presentation up kind of in a chronological order of how things kind of all happened. If there's been updated information, it should be there too. So if I haven't got there yet, just give me a second. Okay, so local units, including counties, were allotted a share of this federal money. This allotment was based on the percentage of population of the local unit compared to the state's population. So IFA keeps a spreadsheet on the allotments and any distributions that are made on the IFA website, so you can go look. So these coronavirus relief funds are only to be used to cover costs that, one, are a necessary expenditure incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID. Two, were not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, 2020. This is the date that the enactment of the CARES Act happened. And three, were incurred during the period that begins March 1st, 2020 and ends December 30th, 2020. Okay. To be able to submit reimbursement requests, the county commissioners needed to sign and deliver the Coronavirus Relief Fund Acceptance Certification by email or U.S. mail to IFA. The reimbursement request form is available on IFA's website, along with directions on how to use and submit the form. Supporting documentation is also required to be submitted with each reimbursement request. The county can choose to pass part of their allocation to other units, such as townships, libraries, if the county is the enacting body, solid waste districts, volunteer fire departments, etc. Since they did not receive direct allocation of funds, if the county has agreed to pass through some of the allocation, these units would submit their requests to the county. The county would then submit for reimbursement, and then once the reimbursement came, would give to that unit. And again, this is a choice by the county. It's not a requirement. Holy cow, that's a lot. Okay. So, once Congress appropriated the money and IFA was gearing up to start the grant process, we realized that we needed to issue some guidance on the accounting side for all the local units. So on April 29th, State Board of Accounts issued a memorandum regarding accounting and appropriation for COVID-19 grants. As a side note, this memo has been updated, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later in the presentation. So this memo identified the fund number series. 8901 through 8925 to be used for the COVID-19 grants, including the Coronavirus Relief Fund distributed by IFA. This grant, along with any other COVID grants, needs to be accounted for in a separate fund. But the IFA one is one fund, so there should be one fund for this grant. I think I've mentioned it several times through the presentation, though we're I don't even know if we're halfway through at this point, but I just want to make sure that we understand separate fund. So I do want to clarify a couple common questions we receive about these separate funds. So if you receive, let's say, a grant from the State Department of Health, and it has the same CFDA number as this Coronavirus Relief Fund, the 21.019, you would account for those in two separate funds. Okay, because they're really two separate grants that were given to you. All right, so it's important to remember that you got one through IFA, but you got the other one from the State Department of Health. All right. Secondly, on the reverse side, if the county decides to pass through money, part of their allotment from IFA to a township, let's say, those funds would be recorded in the same grant fund as the county's reimbursements, because it's all part of the same grant. It would just show up as a subrecipient when you go to report it at the end of the year on your AFR. But we'll get into that later too. So an ordinance is not needed to set up these funds. Again, all records should be maintained. Reimbursement grants typically require an appropriation because it's a county money being spent first before being reimbursed. In this memo, we did have a line that said the State Board of Accounts will not take audit exception to disbursements of county money out of the COVID grants that do not have an appropriation or additional appropriation before being reimbursed. but as of Friday, October 23rd, things have changed. So, and now all allowable expenditures should be expended from a fund with an appropriation, and we'll get more into this in just a minute. So along with all the accounting of these COVID grants come internal controls as well. Internal controls need to be in place just like any other. Remember, separate funds, maintaining records, detailed comments that provide audit trails, appropriate approvals, and reviews are all part of good internal controls. Lori and I will be more than happy to talk to you about internal controls anytime you like, even if it doesn't have to do with the coronavirus. So just give us a call. So when the coronavirus relief fund distributed by IFA was made available to the county, we all realized that there were expenditures for COVID that had already occurred, things that you hadn't planned on buying, you know, PP&E and such. So with the accounting and appropriation of COVID-19 Grants memo, we released guidance on how these expenditures were to be accounted for. This is for all expenditures that occurred prior to receiving the grant that were going to be turned in for reimbursement. So these disbursements needed to be allowable from the grant, and then the disbursement would be reversed within the original fund and posted to the appropriate grant fund as a disbursement. This is done much like a correction of error is recorded. The posting of the correction to move the disbursement would then reinstate the fund balance of the original fund and reappropriate the line that was corrected in a similar manner as IC 6-1.1-18-9. This is the reappropriations from erroneous and excessive disbursements, refunds without appropriation statute. This reversal must be done within the same budget year as the original transaction posted. So again, documentation must be maintained for this correction so that the audit trail can be followed. The accounting system must tie the original claim from the original fund disbursement to the COVID grant fund for specific reference or notation in a comment section. We should be able to trace it from the very first posting all the way through and have all the supporting documentation included. So let's kind of take a look at what this might look like. All right, so all these numbers are made up. This is perfect counting. Perfect counting only deals in whole numbers. We don't like cents and we don't like complicated addition and subtraction. So that's my warning. In this example, the commissioners signed the certification and requested reimbursement on May 10th. As you can see, supplies have been purchased before that time for the PP&E. So on 2/26, they spent $600 on PP&E. The PP&E is an allowable expenditure under this coronavirus relief fund. So since we were asking for reimbursement of that amount, we reverse the disbursement out of the general fund, which adds $600 to the cash balance and adds $600 back to the appropriation for the supplies expenditure line. Now the $600 of PPE needs to be posted to the coronavirus relief fund, which in this case I gave the number 8904. The cash balance of this grant fund would now be negative, and once the reimbursement is received, it will be posted, which will zero out the negative cash balance in the fund. Okay? Okay, so once the new grant fund was created, the county was, and I'm going to say was and underline it, I wish you could see that was, to be dispersing directly from the grant fund. Reimbursements would then be receipted into the grant fund to zero out the negative cash balance. Again, the balance would be zero. By dispersing funds directly out of the grant, this did let you carry a negative balance. All right, and we don't take audit exception to negative balances that are waiting on reimbursement. All right, but all documentation would need to be maintained. I think I've said that 50 times. An expenditure that is spent from the grant fund but not reimbursed from IFA will need to be made whole by the county. So this may mean you have to do a correction the other way, all right, and move it back to the original fund in which it was dispersed. But as you know, things have changed, so we are no longer spending directly out of the grant funds. So on Friday, October 23rd, State Examiner issued Directive 2020-3, Accounting for CARES Money Administered by IFA. The directive outlines 3 frameworks to account for reimbursed costs other than public health and public safety costs. We'll get to those. Transactions for other permitted costs reimbursed by IFA must be accounted for through one of the 3 frameworks. So let's briefly go these. So framework 1, reimbursements received from IFA shall be receipted into the separate grant fund, CARES Grant Fund, the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Reimbursed disbursements originally occurred in another fund will be moved to this separate fund through a reversing entry, like we talked about before. This action again will reinstate your fund balance and reappropriate the fund in that similar manner. The reversal must be done in the same budget year as the original transaction was posted. Once the disbursement is reversed within the original fund and posted to the grant fund, the accounting system should again tie those transactions together. And once these steps are completed, the balance of the separate CARES Grant Fund will be 0. No money shall remain in the separate CARES Grant Fund. Framework 2. If IFA has provided reimbursement based on unpaid invoices or purchase orders, then reimbursements received from IFA shall be receipted into the separate CARES Grant Fund. The expenditures to vendors will be made through the CARES Grant Fund, and these expenditures must match the application made to IFA. If the actual invoice or invoices relating to the purchase order are less than the purchase order, then the difference in the money expended to the vendor and the amount received for purchase order from IFA must be returned to IFA. The items on the invoice must match the items on the purchase order. All documentation must be maintained. Again, this should zero out the fund and no money should be left in there. Framework 3, if you have created a negative balance in your CARES fund based on expenditures made in anticipation of receipt of reimbursement for allowable expenditures, where invoices have already been submitted to IFA, then leave as is and receipt the reimbursement when received, bringing the balance in the separate CARES Grant Fund to 0. Going forward, expend any anticipated allowable expenditures from a fund with an appropriation and follow Framework 1. If a negative balance occurs and the CARES Grant Fund is not fully reimbursed, then the unreimbursed amount will require a reverse entry and posting of the expenditure to the general or other appropriate fund within an appropriated line item. Again, no money should be left in this CARES fund. all of that stuff I just read is really word for word out of the directive. I had this all completely kind of done up on the website, and so I really just wanted to reiterate that because we haven't really talked about that or taken phone calls.
There's a question about that's not on the website yet, so it's going to be put on this week, right?
It should be. It should be. I will. Chase has been on vacation. He's our website not master.
Guru.
Webmaster. That's it. He's a webmaster. So he's been on vacation. I think he comes back today. But I will get it put on the website, okay? You have a note for that. So
yes,
we'll make sure it's up there, okay? But it is word for word. We also sent it out through our eGov. We sent it to AIC?
Yes.
And we sent it to the Auditors Association. So hopefully, if you haven't seen it, we'll get it to you.
And the commissioners and the council.
Commissioners and the council. So we tried to get it out to everybody. So one thing I do want to touch on really quickly is that if you are purchasing equipment such as a vehicle, a big item, you may want to verify with IFA about that purchase to see if it will actually qualify as an allowable cost from that grant. We have been hearing of several counties who have made the purchase and then IFA denied the claim, okay? That can get kind of tricky. So we suggest that if you're going to make anything like that or you question it at all, contact IFA before you do it, okay? I haven't even got to payroll yet.
It's okay. We'll adjust.
We'll adjust.
It's important.
It's very important. Let me have a drink of water real quick, guys. Okay. So, as we're going through our timeline, September rolls around, and now public safety and public health payroll costs are now eligible for reimbursement from the Coronavirus Relief Fund distributed by IFA. So, the public safety and public health payroll costs are eligible. They're for payrolls that incurred between March 1st and September 30th of this year. This update allows for a government to presume that all payroll costs for public health and public safety employees are payments for services responding to COVID. Counties are now able to submit for reimbursement of these costs up to their allotment amount, okay? IFA is highly encouraging the local units maximize this reimbursement for public safety and public health costs over the other designated expense categories such as supplies, PPE, and other COVID expenses. IFA will make reimbursement requests for these public safety, public health payroll costs a priority. And review them all over all others, okay? So if you want it quick, you probably want to do your payroll costs. It is still county's decision on what expenses are needed to get reimbursed through IFA, whether you want to do the equipment and supplies or you want to do the payroll costs associated with public health and public safety. But please understand the payroll cost reimbursements will be reimbursed first. I don't know what that is on the side.
I have no idea.
It's a bunch of letters. Sorry, didn't catch that one. So, all right, so now that public safety and public health payroll costs can be reimbursed through the Coronavirus Relief Fund distributed by IFA, we needed to update the accounting and appropriations of COVID-19 Grants memo that we originally released on April 29th. This updated memo was released September 29th. So in this memo, none of the original information changed, only additional guidance was added as examples of accounting for these payroll costs were added. So since these payroll costs all incurred before they were an allowable expenditure under this grant distributed by IFA, They can be accounted for in the same way as the original memo allowed, with a minor tweak. So this memo outlined how to account for the payroll costs within the Coronavirus Relief Grant Fund. In a similar fashion, the payroll cost disbursements would be reversed from the original fund, much like a correction of error, and then posted as a disbursement against the Coronavirus Relief Fund. By moving this expense, the fund balance in the original fund is reinstated along with the appropriation within the salaries expense line. As with the reversal of claims, other than the payroll costs, this reversal must be done in the same budget year that the original transaction was posted. With the disbursements posted to the grant fund, once the reimbursement is received, it would be receipted to that grant fund and zero out the balance. Again, the directive that came out on October 23rd says again, once this is completed, the cash balance of the separate grant fund will be zero. No money shall remain in the separate CARES grant fund. The only exception we have here is now we have an unneeded appropriation that has been restored. So when we moved the disbursements for PPE, equipment, and others that were claimed, the line item appropriation in the original fund was restored. This appropriation was originally made not to support those COVID costs. So by restoring that, it allowed counties to spend the money on what they had originally budgeted for. With the public safety and public health payroll costs all being presumed COVID related, there's still not really a need for an appropriation to remain here because these payroll costs were originally budgeted for. The council would need to reduce the appropriation, which frees up the balance in the original fund for either reappropriation through normal appropriation procedures or remain as part of the available fund balance for next year's budget. Holy cow. All right. So on September 30th, Paul Joyce, our state examiner, issued a memorandum regarding CARES reimbursements of the public health and public safety payroll cost. This memo was written as an alternative process to provide maximum flexibility for the local governments. This alternative process allows for a one-time transfer to the general fund. I say one-time transfer because all payroll costs will be submitted together on one reimbursement. So, the public health and public safety payroll costs, it's kind of dark, there we go, will be submitted, are determined to be allowable for reimbursement under this Coronavirus Relief Fund. You request for the reimbursement. In this instance, if the alternative process is chosen, the disbursements in the original payroll cost would remain in the original fund and no adjustment would be needed. Once the request has been approved and the county has received it, they would receive the reimbursement into the appropriate Coronavirus Relief Fund and the county is set up. The commissioners should have adopted an ordinance saying they are going to do the alternative process. And once this ordinance is in place, the reimbursement has been received, a claim can be created to move the receipted reimbursements from the grant fund to the general fund. The transfer is to only go to the general fund. Once the funds are in the general fund, normal appropriation procedures should be followed. With money now in the general fund, please remember that to be able to transfer money from one fund to another, it requires statutory authority to do so. One such example would be Indiana Code 36-1-8-5.1. This is your rainy day statute. Regardless of which claims are being submitted for reimbursement, whether it's supplies, equipment, or these payroll costs, there shall be no money to remain in the separate Coronavirus Relief Fund grant fund. As with the times, things are changing and updating almost daily. All right, so again, the directive that came out on Friday, 2020-3, outlines everything we've discussed throughout. Here, it gives examples of how this payroll should work. These prescribed accounting procedures will promote transparency and accountability of funds. That was just my reference. All right, so commonly asked questions. There's really just like 4. Does the alternative process apply to public safety, public health payroll costs only? I'm hoping you're all saying yes. Okay. Is the alternative process a requirement? I hope you're all saying no. Okay. It is a choice. You get to choose which of those processes. It needs to be one of the 2, but you get to choose. Can we transfer payroll costs to another fund by claim instead of the general fund? No. Okay. I tried to make these as simple. I know everybody's trying to figure out what to do with their funds, and we're trying to maximize that, but we've got, like Paul said earlier, we've got to follow what's already been set up, okay? So while I was doing this, I kind of had the presentation kind of done. I did have another question come in, and I thought, we should probably talk about it. What happens if a reimbursement is not received until the following year? So what we're going to tell you is you need to make sure when you are submitting your submitting your claim that you know how much of your allocation you have left at the end of the year. The reversal entry will need to be done in the same year. Okay, so it needs to, even if you haven't received it, it needs to be done within the same year as the original transaction. If IFA does not reimburse for the total submitted, then the county will have to make whole in the next year by reversing what didn't get reimbursed to the original fund. Okay, so this will go against your 2021 budget, so you need to be aware and know how much you got and whether or not it's going to be reimbursed. What we're hearing is it's taking about 2 weeks to get these reimbursements. Again, I don't know, it might be a little bit longer. We are going to suggest that you get it all turned in and all done probably no later than December 15th so that we're not crossing years. All right. Okay, so these are directives and memos that can be found on the home page. Again, I told you this earlier, it's scrolling down on that main page. The only thing I don't have linked here again is the directive, but it came out after we had already put these on the website, so I left them there. We also have not just our directives and memos, we do have information like the executive orders from the governor's office, memos from other agencies such as the Public Access Counselor, DLGF, and we also have some other ones available on there as well. So it's really a great resource, and it is right on the homepage. You don't even have to go anywhere. You just go to our homepage, scroll down, and it's there. All right, quickly. I say quickly. All right. So now that we've discussed the prescribed accounting procedures, we do need to discuss how to report these grants at the end of the year. You're all familiar with filling out the grant schedule with the AFR that you enter into Gateway. The first thing that you're going to need to do is locate the CFDA number. This is the number assigned by the feds and should be located on the grant agreement. If not, contact your grantor agency. Once you've identified the CFDA number, you can go to the SAM website that I've got listed here, and it should give you the federal program title to be used. The pass-through entity part should be the easiest of all because who gave you the money? Okay. So all three of these are required to be entered into the grant section on your AFR, and this is what creates your schedule of expenditures of federal awards, or from here on out, the CFA. That's what we pull when we run our macro, okay? Just like normal grants. The next step when entering this grant information into Gateway is the grant type. So you need to determine whether or not it's a reimbursement, where you're paying the costs up front and being reimbursed, or whether it's an advance. You're getting the money first and then you're spending. That is really important because it dictates what number goes on your CFA. All right, so when you're, for the reimbursement grants, we pull receipts. For advance, we pull the disbursements. But you do enter both in there, okay? So you'll enter receipts and disbursements. It's when you enter the type that it tells which one to pull, okay? So, I'm not doing too bad. So CFA, other considerations. So while discussing what is entered on the grant schedule, there are a couple other things that you need to be thinking about, especially when it comes to the coronavirus relief fund distributed through IFA. All right. The first one we want to discuss is subrecipients. So these are the political subdivisions that a county has passed through portions of this grant to. So if a township so if a township is requesting reimbursement through the county, then the county is giving the township the money from IFA once it's requested it. In this case, the township would be a subrecipient, and those dollars must be reported as the amount of federal awards provided to subrecipients during the year. There's no separate grant fund needed, as it is still part of the original grant. As an example, if the county was allocated $350,000 from IFA, but you gave $25,000 to, in total to all the townships, then you would show $350 on as your federal expenditures, but your amount of subrecipient would be $25,000. You don't have to identify those subrecipients separately on the schedule, but you need to have that documentation someplace so we can see how much was going to each one, okay? Again, documentation, documentation, documentation. We're getting there. Oh, it didn't click. Oh. All right. So while subrecipients is one consideration, another consideration should be non-cash assistance. So non-cash assistance is where grants give you maybe equipment or supplies other than cash. So this must be reported on the grant schedule as well. The county will need to determine the value of the non-cash assistance. This value should be reasonably determined and consistently applied. To determine the value, you should use estimates. You could use something like the fair market value, for example. You need to document how you came up with the value. Maintain all of those details, how it was reasonably determined. And during the audit, we're going to review that you applied it consistently. It's really quiet, no questions. Huh?
No, I think so.
Okay. So, Lori and I, again, we understand it has been an insane year. This coronavirus has totally changed everybody's normal life. We know we're kind of ready to get back to what we considered normal, though I don't think that's there anymore. And with things happening like they are, who knows what the next few months are going to bring. The really big takeaway here is transparency and accountability is very important for these funds, okay? We know that you're going to have numerous questions as we move forward. Just call us, email us. Don't hesitate. We will try and help you the best that we can.
We did have one question come in. If the county has been posting the reimbursement grant money directly to their originating fund, do they need to create the grant fund?
Yes. Yes. If you have did not created a grant fund and you are posting to the original fund, you need to make a correction. You need to set up a separate account and you need to move those there. Anything else?
I think that was it.
Okay.